Thank you, Michael. Welcome, everybody. There are free seats up at the front, so if you're crowded at the back, please come on up. I would like to echo what Michael said about Robin. We will miss you a lot, Robin. He's been our vice president, driving forward our communication on such important issues. It's good to see so many friends here, and I look forward, after I stop talking, to a good discussion, because in this room, there are people that have very important thoughts on some of the subjects that I will be talking about. I want to welcome Hattie Babbitt, who is the vice chair of our board at the World Resource Institute. We're grateful to you, Hattie, for being here and for your leadership. Okay, stories to watch. So this is yesterday in Michigan. So this global warming thing, is it real? Well, welcome to the 342nd month of world temperatures being above the average of the 20th century, including this month. So if you were born after 1985, you have never lived in a month whose temperatures are average or below those of the 20th century. So yes, it's real, but that's really not what I'm going to talk about. Let me talk about sort of just the context as we enter 2014. The recession's over, not spectacular growth, but the rich countries are sort of back on a modest growth path. Everybody knows that the emerging countries have had a slight dip, especially China in their growth, but pretty robust growth overall. So we're really back on track for a massively expanding human economic footprint on the planet. We passed 50 trillion in 2010. We'll probably be at 100 trillion by 2030. So never in history has so much economic stuff been produced, traded, consumed. And so we're seeing a quite astonishing threshold in terms of the middle class. Won't go into the definitions, but the OECD and McKinsey definitions. So in 1990, 1 billion people in the world lived in the middle class, 2 billion in the middle class by 2010, and another 3 trillion in the 2 decades that we're now in. So decisions in 2014 will fundamentally affect how we go. And there are massive implications of the middle class. You change how you consume more electronics, you eat more meat, and above all, you buy more vehicles. Now, if everybody purchased vehicles the way that we do, as they reach a certain income level, the number of vehicles would rise from 1 billion to 3 billion over the next 2 decades. I think that's just about impossible. You couldn't fit them all in, but there is going to be an overwhelming pressure from transportation. So the key question is, can we enjoy this growing prosperity and tackle sustainability at the same time? We believe the answer is yes, but some key decisions that will be made in 2014 will affect how we do it. So let me plunge in to 7 stories. Some are longer than others. I hope you don't get bored, but if you do, just put your hand up and we'll have a discussion. First of all, 2014, the year of cities. How will they grow? Every single day, 274,000 people are added to the cities of the world. 75 million this year, 75 million next year, 750 million this decade, 750 million next decade. Never before has this happened. Cities are drivers of the economy, 65% of global GDP. Cities bring all kinds of problems, but also potential solutions. 70% of greenhouse gases come from cities. In many cities of the world, 10% of their income is lost because of congestion alone. And of course, over 1 million people die of air pollution. Now, there is a fundamental choice to be had. The choice is this or this. And decisions that are made by city leaders will determine what kind of future we have. Let me give an illustration of the implications. Consider, for example, China. This is per capita emissions of greenhouse gases in China, see 7.2. By the way, China this year is overtaking per capita the European Union in emissions of greenhouse gases. But that's not the point I want to make. America obviously has much, much higher per capita emissions nationwide than China. Beijing has higher per capita emissions than China as a whole, but look at New York City, way down there. So cities can be the problem, or cities can be the solution. Now, not all American cities are like New York City, by the way. We could have shown some that were higher than the US average. The plain fact of the matter is how cities are designed, the kinds of buildings we live in, the kinds of transportation we have in them, the economic structure fundamentally affects things. Now, what's so special about 2014? Let me suggest a couple of things. We're seeing a revolution underway in the thinking about cities around the world. Next month in Johannesburg, the C40, which is a group of almost 60 major cities in the world that are committed to climate change, will be meeting in Johannesburg to make some very important commitments of change. Later on this year in Singapore, major cities will come together again to discuss what does it mean really to be a green city. But also this year, fundamentally important, we're going to have a World Cup. What's that got to do with cities? Well, it turns out that the eyes of the world will be on Brazil. And the question will be, what will be the attitude of the world when you finally turn off your television set towards the cities that you see? No city more, and of course Brazil has a higher urban population than almost any other major country in the world. And of course, iconically, this is Rio. Mayor Paes of Rio is taking over as chair of the C40, truly committed to do things differently, really trying to do a good job, but extremely difficult. Rio, Sao Paulo, Brazil is just part of a worldwide movement at the moment that we're seeing in China, we're seeing in India, we're seeing elsewhere, whereby citizens are saying, look, we are not happy with how you're spending money, how you're doing your policies, and we want change. And part of the revolution underway is that it will be a more people-centered. And we could really see this year an important tipping point in attitudes and commitments and plans and statements. Brazil, for example, now has a remarkable new law that says 3,000 cities in Brazil need to have mobility plans. What does that mean? That means you put people, especially poor people, at the center of a transportation system. You don't have superhighways that ignore people, and poor people in particular. You think about public transportation, how people are going to get on that, how they're going to go to work, and so on. And so in Brazil, we're also seeing a revolution in public transport. It was Brazil that introduced originally in Curitiba bus rapid transits. Now more than 10 million people, 12 million people travel on that every single day. 300 cities around the world, growing hugely rapidly, now have bus rapid transit. All part of the revolution. And so what to watch in 2014 is what signals do we get about city development? Which way will cities grow? That's story number one. Now a shorter story. 2014 also could be the year of restoration. What do we mean by that? 2 billion hectares in the world could be transformed. Now the bad news is, every minute of every day, day and night, for the last 20 years, 50 soccer fields of forest have been lost. Every minute. Basically, almost one a second going around the world. This is very bad news, and it's going on whether you're awake or you're asleep. The good news, however, is that, well, partly because of this, we've done some very detailed mapping and come up with the fact that there are 2 billion hectares, that's twice the size of China, that are degraded, that's degraded land that isn't really adding any value. This is not land that's now in productive agriculture, it's land where the trees have largely gone, but basically it's degraded. Now these have huge opportunities. And we now have seen many examples of success. This is Korea in the 1960s. This is the same view today. Now that's not only good for the ecology, it's extremely good for the economy, it's good for the water supply, it's good for poor people and so on. And so too in the Sahel, this is Niger, and we're seeing how to do it. We know how to do it. It needs leadership and it needs a political momentum which doesn't yet exist. Now, 2 years ago, countries got together, governments got together, and they said, look, I tell you what, of this 2 billion hectares, why don't we see if we could restore 150 million? And by restore doesn't mean you necessarily put it back to a pristine forest. You might want to put it into agriculture or some kind of mixed use. But anyway, do something that will add economic and ecological value. And so countries got together and said, okay, let's see if we can get some commitments. And the implication just of this 150 million hectares would be huge. Every year, $84 billion of benefits, 47 gigatons of carbon dioxide. This is just from the 150 million. This would be like taking 350 large coal-powered plants and letting them run for 40 years. You would save that much greenhouse gas emissions just from that. And almost 20%, almost a fifth of the emissions gap we have at the moment could be addressed by that 150. So this is very important. We're starting to see some small steps. Brazil is committed to regreen 1 million, Costa Rica 1 million, El Salvador 1 million, Rwanda, a real leader in this space, tiny country but big ambitions. They're regreening 2 billion. And actually the United States has committed to 15 million hectares of regreening. So the question is what to watch this year. Where have I gone? I've lost my picture, Michael. Maybe you could come up. Yeah. Could somebody who's cleverer than I am? Good. So what to... just chat amongst yourselves. So let me continue as Michael finds this again. This year, countries of the world will gather again in June in Bonn to rethink about these commitments. And the hope is that, that we will see a lot more countries come into, there we go.
Sorry.
Oh, you're good, Michael. This is great.
Don't give me too much.
There we are. There we are. Brilliant. Okay. So what you could really see is the beginnings in 2014 of a global movement. And that's what this takes. It takes not only the technical knowledge, it takes not only the fact there are pilots that are already working out there, it takes a political movement that could start to be seen in the summer of this year. And as we go into the high-level panel, the high-level heads of state meeting that Ban Ki-moon is going to host in September, we could start seeing the real beginnings of a global movement. It could be one of the most important movements that will take place over the next 10 years. Okay, let's move on to number 3. There we are. Sustainable palm oil. Why is that a big issue? Who cares about palm oil? Well, partly because it's growing very rapidly, 400% increase in just 20 years, but also because when you go into your supermarket, half of every single product on the shelves has oil palm in it. Oil palm then becomes palm oil, of course. So if you got up this morning and you had a shower and you washed your hair and you put your makeup on and you had your breakfast, you came to work, palm oil has touched you probably 4 or 5 times already. So this is a very, very important product. The problem has been that as the demand for palm oil, which is associated with that emergence of the middle class, has grown so rapidly, so too oil palm has been grown on land whose trees have been cut down in order to grow it. So 90% of all the massive expansion in, say, Borneo has been on land that has required the trees to be cut down. So the revolution that we want to see is, instead of that, put it on some of that degraded land, some of that 2 billion hectares that I just mentioned. Now, why is 2014 important? It's important because we're seeing some very, very remarkable changes. Here's the CEO of Wilmar, which is, in terms of the trading and production, overall the #1 company in the world on oil palm, saying there is a strong and rapidly growing demand for traceable, deforestation-free palm oil, and we intend to meet it as a core element of our growth strategy. So you're seeing companies like Unilever now committed by 2014 to be able to know whether or not it comes from land that required deforestation to take place. Procter & Gamble, same commitment, but a little bit later, and both of them by 2020 want full traceability. Nestle, same thing as well. So these kinds of companies who are massive demanders are starting to ask for change. And so there is a certification process for palm oil. This is called the Roundtable on Sustainable Palm Oil. You see, it's been growing, still only 15% of world trade. And what we could see this year is the beginnings of an acceleration of this. Now, what enables this is that for the first time ever, we're able to actually trace where oil palm comes from. This is a major product line that the World Resources Institute will launch next month. And Nigel Sizer is here, and Craig Hansen, who are overseeing this really important product, essentially. If you know how to look at a Google map, you will be able to see in almost real time changing forest landscape. So you can see this is deforestation. We can go back, look at month after month, because you can get the satellite data to reverse, if you like, back to 2000. So here's Sumatra. This is the province of Riau. That's where deforestation is taking place. These are the oil palm plantations. So you can start asking, so are they deforesting inside or outside? These are the protected areas. So what you're able to see actually there is that protected areas are actually being cut down in order to plant oil palm, and we know who's doing it. So you're able for the first time to actually make a difference. Here in the Tesonilo National Park, you actually can see the oil palm plantation owned by the group that's down there, and we know all the names because we now have access to that data. We're able to say, look, wait a minute, this isn't right. So from now on, you're not able to hide. And then, you know, this is a picture that we work with Greenpeace and other organizations. They can actually go and take pictures of it and show exactly what's happening. So if you're a bad guy, there's nowhere to hide. If you're a good guy, you'll be able to demonstrate that you really are honorable. So this is really important, what to watch. Will better information and the information revolution, will it change and expedite the shift to sustainable oil palm? And will other products, you know, soy and all the others that many people in this room have been working on, will they follow rapidly? Okay, the fourth story to watch relates to China. It really could be, potentially, a tipping point in China. Everybody knows that last year was the year of pollution in China. In Beijing, 189 days had dangerously high air pollution. Many of you know Beijing very well. Our staff, almost every one of them, they get up in the morning, they look to see what the air pollution is, they get data from the American embassy, and they decide whether or not to put a face mask on. And they're saying, look, enough's enough now. And so we're starting to see this sort of a popular uprising last year. Sina Weibo is the most popular social media site in China. PM 2.5. How much is that tweeted in this country? Well, people don't know what it is. In China, 3 million mentions of PM 2.5. Why? Because that's the kind of air pollution they're so concerned about. And there's now a deep, deep recognition throughout the leadership of China and citizenry that coal is the primary reason. China consumes half of all the world's coal. One of the hobbies that we have is to count all the coal plants in the world. These are the ones we counted last year that were being planned. These are electricity generating plants that are being planned for China, 363. What we then do, using our water risk mapping tool, we say, well, you know, it's not good for the pollution, but it's also actually quite risky for your energy security because you need a lot of water. And we do projections on water risk using our aqueduct tool. And it turns out that half of all those new power plants are in highly water risky areas. So there's a growing feeling now in China that, yes, we're still going to have to use coal, but we need to be more aggressive in the move away from it. This is an extremely important statement by NRDC, which is the super ministry in China. As you know, climate change is already a serious threat to food, water, ecological, energy security, and to people's lives and property. And so you're seeing the largest sums of money that any country has ever committed to air pollution, for example, 277 billion just a few months ago, that's now going to be spent starting this year. A ban on new coal plants in 3 major metropolitan areas tighter pollution standards, which will make some of the planned coal plants less attractive, and so they won't be built. So little by little, we're starting to see, together with 8 cities have been given very, very serious fines. And last year, 50% of all of China's new electricity was generated from renewable sources. And this year is important because for the first time ever, 7 pilot programs for cap and trade will be fully operational. And a key question is, let's watch those, see whether they work. This shows both those 7 cities and provinces. It also shows what are called low-carbon pilot cities, which China is working on. So what to watch for could well be a tipping point. Look for public statements, but above all, look to see how that $277 billion is being spent. Look to see how these pilot programs for cap and trade, which are supposed to go nationwide by 2015, let's see what actually happens. And will that 50% of renewables out of the total increase in new electricity generation, will that continue in 2014? Okay, let's turn from China to the United States, but still on the subject of power. 2014 is a crucially important year for the United States. Why? Because there will be a new guideline put forward for existing coal-fired electricity generating plants. Today, as you may have seen if you read your emails this morning, on the government register, the proposed guidelines for new power plants are going public today. And in June, extremely importantly, the guidelines for existing plants will be there. Why does it matter? Well, 1/3 of all US emissions come from electricity generation, and because the United States now has a target to reduce overall greenhouse gases by 17%. This is President Obama talking to some leaders of the utilities, and they should be looking worried because they do need to change the way they do business. Now, what to look for in the new rule when it comes out on June the 1st, we've done a lot of analysis on this, and in our analysis suggests that it is very reasonable that these new regulations should result in a 31% reduction in GHG emissions below 2011 by 2020. Now that sounds like quite a big reduction, doesn't it? And actually, if you look further forward, our analysis says that done right, these regulations actually could reduce greenhouse gases by 74% from electricity generation. Now you need this, you need that 31%, by the way, in order to reach the 17% overall reduction of greenhouse gases for the United States. Now this seems like, wow, this is going to cost the economy a lot. Turns out actually it really doesn't. Turns out that actually it's potentially good for the economy. One of the reasons for that is that actually we have a massively aging stock of electricity generating plants. In the last 2 years, almost 100 out of just over 1,000 plants in the United States have been closed. And Union of Concerned Scientists just came out with a report that basically says almost half of all of those plants that are generating electricity from coal actually are ready for retirement anyway. The average age is almost 40 years. So in a way, this aging, inefficient stock is potentially a blessing. And it's terribly important when people say, oh, it's too ambitious. Well, actually, no, we need to refresh anyway. And this year, in 2014, we will see the opening of a remarkable carbon capture and storage plant in Mississippi, in Kemper. So basically, traditional, old-fashioned, coal-powered plants will no longer be built. The question is, for 2014, is CCS, carbon capture and storage, is it here? Or is this just an expensive experiment? And so the discussion around the opening of this plant will be extremely important. So what to watch for? Will EPA rules be ambitious? Will the US medium-term strategy emerge? And remember, the other thing that has to happen this year is the United States administration, in addition to getting on with its 17% reduction, it needs to, by the end of this calendar year, have a proposal to put on the table in the first 3 months of next year as to what the plans are for the 2020 to 2030 period. So you'll be glad to know we're heading towards the end. We're in the home stretch now, only 2 more to go. 6, a UN summit this September that Ban Ki-moon has called. The good news is, if you go on the website of the UNFCCC, that's the United Nations Convention on Climate Change, you will see that 90 countries now have plans for emissions by 2020. Sounds good, never happened before in history, so that's really good. Problem is, if you add them all up, they simply don't add up. I mean, we're not on the way to a 2-degree world, we're on the way to a 3 or a 4-degree Celsius increased world, so 3 degrees, you know, that's 5 degrees Fahrenheit. So we're absolutely missing the mark right now. We're heading to a very bad place as a planet. So despite these good intentions, despite the 17% of the United States, we're still nowhere close to doing what we need to do. And so what we're seeing at the moment is mounting evidence. This is a hurricane, typhoon, Haiyan in the Philippines, one of the strongest ever. We're learning a lot about the budget that we're allowed to spend in terms of how much carbon we're allowed to emit into the air. It turns out that about 2/3 of all the known reserves for oil, gas, and especially coal actually couldn't be burnt if we are going to stay within that limit that the IPCC, the International Panel on Climate Change, has clarified is the limit. This last year, just a couple of months ago, as you probably know, the IMF came out with new estimates as to how we are throwing money away, encouraging too much energy to be used. In terms of sort of cash, easy to understand subsidies, about $500 billion is spent every year encouraging people and companies to spend, to use more fossil fuel energy. What the IMF did is they said, well, actually, if you look at the true economic cost, it's about $2 trillion a year we're wasting. We're subsidizing the wrong thing, and less than $100 billion is used to subsidize renewable energy, for example. So we're learning a lot. In 2014, 3 very, very important reports will be coming out. First, the 2 IPCC reports in March and April that will look in detail at the implications of climate change for the economy and also suggest some policies. And then this, a very important panel of gentlemen, Hank Paulson there, Tom Steyer in the middle, and of course ex-mayor Michael Bloomberg. The 3 of them are overseeing this important study called Risky Business, which is going to look at the risks that the United States economy is currently under because of climate change. And then very importantly, there's an international commission that we're heavily involved in called the New Climate Economy. It's called the International Commission on the Economy and Climate Change. President Calderon there in the middle from Mexico chairs that. There's ex-Prime Minister Stoltenberg next to him. Whole group of distinguished people are overseeing this. And what this is asking the question, not coming at it from an environmental standpoint, it's asking, done right, is it possible to move from where we are today to a low-carbon future and actually help your economy? So there's a group of world-class economists that are advising this process. And these are not environmental economists, these are growth economists. And so this will land in September in time for the summit that Ban Ki-moon is hosting. We're bringing together heads of state and government and heads of major corporations, really asking the question, okay, we're a year and a bit away from needing to do a deal on climate change. What do the leaders really think? So the question will be, is there a momentum growing? Is there a pathway to Paris in December 2015? The world has set itself the target that it will come together and it will agree on a deal whereby all the countries in the world have an obligation. Could go either way. Could be a total failure, could be a total game changer. 2014 will be the year that makes a difference. And so what to watch for? Will growing evidence spur public pressure? How will heads of state react? And for us in the United States, to what extent will the administration be a serious player pushing for more ambition and be ready, because the idea is that each country has to put its obligations or its commitments on the table in the first 3 months of 2015. Will the United States be ready, especially after the midterm elections, to say something that is really ambitious, that will inspire others to follow? And so the final story is, it's possible that 2014 will be the year where more people in the world vote in national elections in democracies than ever before in history. And 3 of the 4 largest democracies in the world will have elections. They are all highly consequential elections. First, President Dilma is up for re-election in Brazil. Some very, very important issues will drive the choices relating to both cities and rural development, social cohesion, poverty reduction in Brazil. In India, with 780 million voters, some terribly important choices, again, relating to the emerging middle class, relating to choices on low carbon. Will India aspire to do some of the things that China is doing? And then Indonesia, there's President Yudhoyono, who's will be standing down after 10 years. President Yudhoyono has been, as you know, a leader in, for example, having a moratorium on forests. Some of the candidates will want to continue that. Others will want a very different path. So really important choices. And then, of course, the European Union has very important elections. The European Union has traditionally been a leader on issues of sustainability, but quite frankly, right now, there are some political and economic pressures that are leading to actually less enthusiasm for doing the right thing. So watch out for the European Union elections. And then finally, obviously, everyone in this room will be looking out for the midterm elections. Let me not say more about that. You might want to discuss it, but elections really matter. Here are 2 guys that have been elected in the last 15 months. The one on the left was re-elected, and shortly thereafter he announced, for the first time ever, a national plan on climate change. The one on the right, Tony Abbott, the new Prime Minister of Australia, within a month of coming to office, he abolished the highly innovative policies on climate change and carbon taxation, and relinquished the commitments that Australia had. So elections really matter. 2014 is a year of choice. Which way will these elections go? What will the results tell us about economic development and sustainability? So 7 stories in 2013. The year of cities, a potential year on restoration. Third, a potential tipping point on sustainable oil palm, one of the most important supply chains in the world. Potentially very important decisions on China. Certainly important decisions on US energy standards. Perhaps the most important heads of state, heads of government meeting ever on climate change in September. And some very, very important elections. Good. Thank you very much.